Alright, it's Bronco Day. Today's the day we start the ball joint project, which is a fairly big job on these old Broncos F-150s. Shop can charge up to $1,000 or even a little bit more to do both sides of the front ball joints on these. So we're going to do upper and lower ball joints, probably on both sides, but we're going to start with the passenger side because that one's the worst. And I'm pretty sure it's going to need new wheel bearings too, but we'll see more for sure when we get that done. Doug's currently removing the 32-inch tire right now. 33-inch tire. And this does have a slight lift kit on it as well, as you can see how high it's setting. Well, none of those factors should really affect the changing of the ball joints. The only thing involved in this is this one has the manual lockout hubs, which doesn't really affect this. Just a little bit different procedure for pulling the hub assembly apart. And we're going to go through this step by step and document how long this process takes us. It's 3:30 right now in the afternoon, and we're going to see how far we go, and we'll keep you updated step by step in this whole process. The wheel off. Now it's time to remove the lock hub assembly, but apparently this one just slides off. Alright, now we've taken the circle clip snap ring off, followed by a thrust washer. And now we have the locking hub assembly, or I forget what this thing is called, that goes on next. But if you look, he's pulling the tail shaft of the drive shaft there, wiggling it side to side. You can see there's a lot of free play there, which makes me think the wheel bearings inside the hub are probably bad, or inside the steering knuckle are probably bad. We'll be looking into changing those too. But next thing is to get the spanner wrench and take this large thing, which I forgot the name of, here off next. So. Alright, we're spinning this retainer out. It's kind of a weird setup. I don't really understand how it works with the retainer and the back plate.
Wow.
Does that come apart, or does that not come apart? Maybe we shouldn't take it apart.
Maybe we shouldn't.
Is it like a one-way ratcheting gear, or?
I don't know. We're not going to take it apart.
Okay, good idea. Set it down. Alright, that exposes the main wheel bearing here.
Which just pulls out.
Yeah, which just pulls out. Which probably wasn't bad. That one's not bad. It's the inner one inside the knuckle that seems to be bad. We could replace that if you want to. Half-inch drive socket to remove them, loosen them up. We'll use our handheld electric impact to take them actually off. I have a little container set up to put all the hardware and bolts in, which he's ignoring.
You want that down here?
I do, so you can put the stuff in it.
Are you just going to film and be annoying?
Yep.
I'm just going to do this all myself, huh?
I'm supervising and teaching.
Building father-son memories as we speak.
A bonding moment. Brake caliper was removed by driving the two pins out toward the front of the vehicle. The rotor came right off, and now we have, how many of these?
5, 6?
6 9/16 nuts that need to come off so that we can remove the spindle. How many you got off so far? 1. The others are pretty tight, but we're going to work on it. We might have to heat them, but we will get all 6 of those off. Nuts are off, I should say. Now, is that spindle going to, or it's not spindle, the hub going to slide off, or are we going to have to get a slide hammer on it and pull it off?
I don't know. I don't know how this comes off.
The whole thing just slides off.
This thing's supposed to come off too?
What?
This whole thing?
No, just the center
Just the
center part.
That ain't coming off. Look at that.
Are you ready?
Oh yeah.
Alright, here we go. Tell me when.
We've been.
Oh! Still trying to get the spindle here off. The only thing holding it in is the pressed fit into the steering knuckle. All the bolts have been loosened. It's been heated and cooled and PB blastered. We've been tapping on it with a block of wood. The wood has been absorbing the force of the impact, I think. So what I'm going to do is lay the steel pipe across it to protect it, and then hit the steel pipe. That's a solid steel bar. Should transmit all of the energy from the hammer. Maybe. Maybe not. So I got the, what's that called? Not knuckle. What's that thing called? Spindle. We got the spindle out by taking a steel bar like we showed in the earlier video and popped it out, working it back and forth that way. We're taking the wire brush on the drill motor now and we're cleaning all the corrosion and rust up away from around the hole where it presses into. Alright, we used the slide hammer with the pilot bearing attachment tool here to remove the spindle bearing from inside of the spindle, on the inner edge of the spindle. This was the worst bearing of all of them, and it goes in there like that, and we're going to be using a seal driver to tap that back down into place. But we used the pilot bearing puller to yank that out real easy, no problem. The universal joint, or wheel joint I guess some people call it, on the front drive axle appeared like it might have been the original one on this, since it was new. It was really badly worn and floppy, which was probably causing most of our wobble between that and the regular wheel bearings and the whole axle assembly. So we tried to replace the universal joint ourselves. It was in there really tight, and I don't have access to a press or even a good vise and workbench here at my house right now. So we ended up taking this to the local machine shop at the auto parts store, and the mechanic there, and just helpful cat, pressed it out for us for a small fee. I think it was actually $20 to press the old bearing out, or universal joint out, and press the new one in. And then we went ahead and bought the universal joint from him along with the assorted seals as well. So we're ready to continue on the reassembly process here. We decided not to replace the actual ball joints because even though they look like they may be fairly old, there's absolutely no play in them at all. And we're wondering about it because we're right here, and this would be the time to do it if we're going to do it. But honestly, it didn't take that much effort and time to get all this apart like you would think it would. You know, people talk about what a big job this is, and it really didn't take that long to take all this apart. So if by some chance we do need the new ball joints on later, we'll do them later and say, hey, we didn't need to do them until now. We've gotten most of our parts together here, and some of the parts have been pre-assembled. The very first thing we're going to do now to the steering knuckle here is to reinstall the dust shield. And I would like to replace it, but they're really hard to find and quite pricey, so we're not going to. We're just going to put it back on the way it was. Alright, we finished up by putting the new wheel bearings into the front and rear of the brake rotor, along with a new dust cover on the back of the brake rotor. We torqued down the spindle nuts behind it to 65 foot-pounds each, and there's what, 6 of those, Doug? 6 of those, right? Mm-hmm. Once that's torqued down, there's really nothing else to do except slide the rotor back on, get it kind of into place, because the wheel bearings aren't necessarily going to go all the way back in on their own. We held it up as tight as we could. We tapped on the front face here lightly on each side with a hammer to make sure the wheel bearing went back as far as it could until we got enough thread sticking out here to get a hold of. Once the threads were sticking out, we put the spindle nut adapter thing, it's some sort of ratcheting spindle nut adapter. I don't really understand how it works or what it does, but there it is. And we torqued that down to, what, 150 foot-pounds? Yes. It may or may not be enough, I'm not sure, but it's actually tightened up the wheel pretty tight. So we backed it off 90 degrees and retightened it a second time. And then after that, all that was left was the thrust washer here, which we cleaned up and reinstalled. There's no up or down or left or right for that. It just goes on either way. And then finally the little circlip that goes down here, which pulls the axle tail out far enough and locks it in place here to engage into the manual lockout hub mechanism. So the last step in this is to get the lockout hub mechanism and slide it back over this before we put the tire on, and we'll show you the lockout hub mechanism too. Alright, this particular vehicle has manual lockout hubs, and they're a little different than most of the ones I've ever seen before. When we went to AutoZone, they gave us two different size wheel bearings, one inner and one outer, but this vehicle actually uses the same size inner and outer wheel bearing. Do you remember what set that was at? 38?
Set 38.
Set 38 from AutoZone for the inner and outer wheel bearings on this particular one. And the other weird thing about this is the lockout hub, I'll show it to you here, the lockout hub has no bolts or nuts or hex head or anything to secure it on. When you get ready to put it on, it just slides right over. Do not remove this Phillips head screw on the end of the manual lockout hub. If you do, then you end up having to take the retaining ring out inside and pull the guts out and manually reassemble the lockout mechanism, starting with the inside knob and the ratcheting clickers and all that stuff. And there's just no reason to take that screw out of here ever, really, in the disassembly process. Good morning, everyone. Me and Pop-Up are out here. It's 10:20 in the morning, and we're gonna start working on the Bronco today. We started our project yesterday on the passenger side front. We were told the ball joints were bad, and we got it apart and found out it was actually the wheel bearings that need to be replaced. And we struggled a little bit and learned a little bit, and we got the job done. And today we're going to do the driver's side front. We're going to video that more today than we did before, because now that we've done it once, we can give you some better tips and more direct information on how it all works, and we can get this done way quicker now that we've actually done it once ourselves. So we might actually need to do the ball joints on this side. We're not sure yet, but I've inspected it myself and I don't think so. We took it to a shop to get an alignment done, and they put it up on the rack and they wiggled the wheels left and right, then they wiggled the wheels up and down, said, oh, can't align it, your ball joints are bad. But clearly what I guess they didn't realize or know is that, you know, bad wheel bearings will cause the wheel to wiggle up and down just as much as it does left and right. So, you know, you can have perfectly good ball joints and still have up and down wiggle in the wheel. The question is whether or not the ball joints themselves are wiggling up and down, which these do not appear to be. But we're going to check it again when we get it all apart and get the weight off it. Alright, the truck's up in the air, the wheel's off, we're jack stand supported. And now we're going to grab the hub here like this, and we're going to just rock it back and forth until it comes out. Next, we're going to remove the brake caliper here by driving out these two pins. That's a weird setup on these older Fords. They don't use bolts at all to hold the caliper on. They have these rubber insulated pins that drive through. The bottom one you can drive through from either direction. Alright, here's a time-saving tip for you. Once you've driven the bottom pin out toward the back and pulled it out, you can note that the sharpest point of the V section of it, pointing downward right now, is what goes down into the sharpest point of the V of the steering knuckle mount. So once that's out, you still have the top one to deal with. But there's a trick for that, and I just learned it myself. I'm sure most everybody else probably knows it. Take your screwdriver or pry bar, lift up on the brake caliper like this until you see that it's popped out on the bottom here. Once that's popped out, you can grab the top slide pin, just pull it right out. So you don't have to fight with driving that one out before you disassemble it. Just pop this out a little bit so it pops up above the ridge here. Then you can grab that, it'll pull right out with your fingers. Saves you the time and effort of having to try and drive it out from the back side. And now we're going to lift the caliper off and support it right over here on this frame rail for now. I'm not worried about cracking the brake lines because those hoses are brand new last fall. Alright, we've got it apart. I had to look at the spindle nut, and the side play travel and up and down travel in this particular one was very small compared to the other side. So just on a hunch, I got out my torque wrench and my axle socket, and I put it on the spindle nut and gave it a little turn, and it was quite loose. I wasn't even getting 30 foot-pounds of torque on it. So we put it back on here, and we're going to torque it down. It's supposed to be like 150 foot-pounds, but it's a little much for my taste to try and go. I'm going to do like that was 120. So we've got 120 foot-pounds of torque on that, and now I take my rotor here and I add no wobble at all in the rotor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the wheel back on and a couple of the lug bolts tightened down, and we're just going to have a quick check to see if there's any more free play in it. But before I do that, I'm going to leave it on the jack stand, pull my jack out, and lift up a little bit on the bottom of the steering knuckle itself, so I can make sure that there's no movement or play at all in the upper or lower ball joints. Alright, here's how I like to check the ball joints on a truck like this to make sure that I've got it right, because I don't trust myself just putting a pry bar in there, moving it up and down. I like to really feel for extra movement in the upper and lower ball joints with my fingers. So what I do is I support the axle on a jack stand, and then I bring my jack around and put it directly underneath the lower ball joint. So the whole weight of the vehicle supported on the jack stand on the axle. The steering knuckle, ball joint assemblies are hanging free, still bolted on of course to the axle, but just hanging there with no weight on them at all. So I take the jack and bring it up so it's just underneath the steering knuckle, and then let me show you. I put my fingers right here between the steering knuckle and the upper ball joint, and I give the jack a couple pushes to take the weight off of the steering knuckle and lift it up a little bit, and then I can feel if there's any movement at all in the ball joint by the tension on my finger when it goes up and down. It's very important to keep the jack stands secure and make sure you've got it supported well. So I'll put my finger here and then I'll jack it up a little bit until it touches, and I'll see if I feel any change in the diameter or distance between the two. And we can see I just touched it. Nothing. I got no variation at all in the height of the ball joint, or the gap of the ball joint between the knuckle and the frame. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, as I get my finger in here. There, I think. Let pressure off it, and then back up again. Again, I feel nothing. So that tells me that there's absolutely nothing wrong with these ball joints. And I'll do a couple more pry tests on it just to be double sure. See if anything shows up in the pry test for lateral movement. Alright, so we've got no play up and down, left or right in the ball joints, top or bottom. So we're going to call it good. We've tightened up the axle nut. We're going to put a little bit of grease around it and grease the front hubs a little, the lockouts, and reassemble everything and see how it goes.